So, but if we have today, what's the date today?
The 10th.
So we have the 10th and then the 17th next week. So we'll have Bible study this Thursday and next Thursday, and then we'll have our Sunday study this Sunday and then the following Sunday, and then we'll be off for a couple weeks, like for Christmas and New Year's, just so everybody knows. So yeah, it'd be great to see everybody on Sunday, and then be good to see everybody last week for the last Bible study. We'll see how far we get tonight. So I think we're gonna have a couple more people in here, but I don't know. I know that Z is not gonna come today because he's asking for prayers. If you guys remember Z, he's the real skinny guy, smiles a lot, from Myanmar, and he's going up near the Chinese border where they have a new little Bible college starting, and so it's cold, like it's snowing up there. I mean, it's a cold area, and he's going to be gone for several months, for 3 months at least. And so he just wanted prayers from everybody so we can think about him. And he said, if for some, like by some miracle, we're able to go in February, because we got invited to go back and teach to Southeast Asia in February. So if we're able to go, then he'll come down for the teaching. He'll come down from the mountains, which would be great. But otherwise, he'll be gone for 3 months, and they have no internet. So there's no internet or anything there. So, which is kind of cool and kind of crazy. But that's kind of where he'll be. So if you guys just keep him in your prayers, that would be great. And that's Z. He was one of my buddies and translators. He's the president of a little Bible college up there. So, all right. Well, we're going to get started with
Hi, Miriam.
one of the last 2 weeks. Hey, Miriam, how are you?
Hi, good. I'm glad I made it.
We kind of just we're going over that we have 2 weeks left this week and next week, and then 2 more Sundays left. So, all right, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 8. We're going to try to, in the next hour or so, wrap up chapter 8, and then we'll try to maybe work on chapter 9 or something like that for next week. We'll see how it goes. We're never in a hurry, and we don't want to sort of like be specific schedules, so we sort of get to what we get to. And my wife was preaching last week, so we'll see how much she does this week. So, but are you guys, everyone can see us and hear us okay on your guys' end? Is anyone having any issue? We're all good? Somebody give me a heads up.
Mary's giving you a thumbs up.
Okay, cool. All right.
Yeah, you're good.
All right. Well, then, if somebody will pray for our time, just say a word of prayer to the Lord, and then I'm going to have Tarrance read Matthew chapter 8, verses 14 to the end. So somebody want to pray? Cass, you want to pray? Is Rocky being quiet enough so you can pray?
Right now he is. We'll try it. Lord, thank you for the opportunity that we have tonight to gather, to read your word, to study your word, and to hopefully find what it is that you want us to put into practice. So we would ask that this would just be a productive time, that you would enable Jack and Sarah to communicate the words that you have for them to share with us, that you would help us to be good listeners, and that you would most of all help this to have an impact on our lives, and to kind of just have ripple effects out into the rest of our week. So we thank you for the opportunity, for tools like Zoom to be able to communicate. And we ask and look forward to a time when we'd be able to do this in person again. So thank you for all of the gifts that you give us. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right, thank you. And Tarrance, our reader, is going to roll through that. You guys can just listen, or you can follow along if you want. This is verse 14 to the end. Tarrance, you're muted, so hang on. So start over again.
I knew that. I was just testing everyone.
I just thought you were speaking in tongues and I didn't have the gift or something.
All right, again. And when Jesus entered Peter's house, he saw his mother-in-law sick with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she rose and served him. That evening they brought to him many who were possessed with demons, and he cast out the spirits with a word and healed all who were sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. He took our infirmities and bore our diseases. Now, when Jesus saw great crowds around him, he gave orders to go over to the other side. And the scribe came up and said to him, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Another of the disciples said to him, "Lord, let me first go and bury my father." But Jesus said to him, "Follow me and leave the dead to bury their own dead." And when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves. But he was asleep. And they went and woke him, saying, "Save, Lord, we are perishing." And he said to them, "Why are you afraid, O men of little faith?" Then he rose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. And the men marveled, saying, "What sort of man is this that even winds and sea obey him?" And when he came to the other side, to the country of the Gadarenes, two demoniacs met him coming out of the tomb, so fierce that no one could pass that way. And behold, they cried out, "What have you to do with us, O Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" Now a herd of many swine was feeding at some distance from them. And the demon begged him, "If you cast us out, send us away into the herd of swine." He said to them, "Go." And they came out and went into the swine. And behold, the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea and perished in the waters. The herdsmen fled, and going into the city, they told everything and what had happened to the demoniacs. And behold, all the city came out to meet Jesus. And when they saw him, they begged him to leave their neighborhood.
All right. So if folks remember, this is Sarah and I are just going to be discussing this, and there's no script, and whatever gets said. We're kicking stuff around, and obviously I'm generally teaching the study, but we're working together. She may have things to say. She has questions or comments, and we're just trying to do this like if we were all sitting in a room.
I always have
she
questions.
Always has stuff to say. Okay, so anyway, just remember that it's not scripted, it's not staged. We're just trying to kind of create a scenario that we would normally be in if we're doing Bible study, and we would all be together. The other thing is, I'm a little under the weather. You can't see, but I have a big infection on my nose and my eye. I'm all swollen and infected. Apparently, this is happening a lot due to the mask wearing, where you pinch the mask on your nose. There's a lot of skin infections. So I have a very strange and very painful infection. And then I have 40-year-old stupid eyes. I can't see small print. So I can't really even wear glasses because my nose hurts. And so anyway, I'm a little under the weather. So hopefully I don't pass out or anything. And we'll see. I'll have to trust that Sarah.
Are you in danger of that?
I'll have to trust that Sarah is actually reading the scripture or telling me things properly, because I might not be able to read it because I can't see small print and I don't have contacts and all that stuff. So we'll see how it goes. It'll be an interesting night. So, and I'm on medication and all that good stuff. So, okay. Well, first of all, I'll say, if you know anything about Peter, you know that he was kind of a tumultuous guy. And he was a little bit of a rocky guy. He got angry. I mean, he was going to pick up the sword, and he was a little bit of a frustrated fellow.
Yeah.
And
and he went like 100 miles an hour in whichever direction he was heading.
Yeah. And I can tell everybody the reason why. You want to know why?
Why?
Because Jesus healed his mother-in-law. And I think that would make most men uncomfortable. So, I think that he blames Jesus for that.
At the end, like,
I'm just kidding. I know this is being recorded. I am totally joking. Please don't out me on Twitter. I don't want to be canceled. Okay. So, but I would just say the first segment here, you could just pass it over that it's another healing. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at this and say, how is this applicable to our lives? And so often, I believe the way that this is so important to us is that we ask the Lord for things, we ask things in prayer, we come to him, and sometimes amazing things happen. And yet what goes on here is that, the fever left her, she's perishing, obviously. I mean, we don't have medical technology. There's no antibiotics. If you're sick, especially with something significant enough for Jesus to come and heal you, this is a life-threatening illness, And so, but the fever left her and she rose and served him. And I think that that's instructive because we don't know the story about the other people. So verse 16, that evening they brought to him many who were possessed with demons and cast out a spirit, and he healed them all. Okay, this is what was to fulfill by the prophets. We could spend a whole time going into the nearly 1,000 prophecies that Jesus fulfilled in his lifetime. That is just miraculous for one person to fulfill things about the future 500, 1,000 years ahead of time. But that's not really the point of this in one sense, meaning that would take a ton of time, and that goes to the credentials of who Jesus is. But this is just saying, we don't know about the rest of these people, but certainly this woman who was healed by Jesus understood there was a healing with a purpose. And Jesus didn't really heal people conditionally. He healed a lot of people and cured them of diseases. And it wasn't like, well, only if they followed him and listened to him did they remain cured. There's a story of him healing 10 lepers, and they all leave and only one returns and comes back and gives thanks. And he's like, where are the 9? Well, we don't get any indication that those 9 lepers all of a sudden were re-struck with leprosy, that Jesus was somehow healing them and then said, well, but if you don't come and follow me and be a disciple, that, it's gonna reverse. The curse is gonna happen.
There were no takebacks.
No, there was no takebacks, and it wasn't conditional in that sense. And so what happens, I think, that people we are supposed to learn that there's a proper response to what God has done for us. The miracles, the amazing things, the little graces, the providences, the healing sometimes, the medicine, whatever it may be, and that the response is to come and serve Jesus. He doesn't make us do that. And we can just be healed and be taken care of and be provided for and have little things happen, and we can just go on about our life, and that happens all the time. You see that in the story so often, that Jesus heals thousands of people, no doubt, and yet 12 people are staunch followers who really, really stick with him. Of course, that has expanded over the years, but that the grace of the Lord and what Jesus is doing for people seems to happen to many more people than really respond to him. But we're getting here that this woman is extra special because she does something and she's going to return thanks to him and give thanks and have the proper response, which is to serve him and love him and care for him. And as opposed to just like, oh, great, thanks, I'm going to go home and tell my family, And so that is part of how we're supposed to find ourselves in the story, that it's like, when you understand who God is and when you understand who Jesus is, and that you're being taken care of in so many different ways, that there's a proper response. And we have to find our way into that. Otherwise, it's kind of like, well, just carry on, like no big deal, and that can make ought to make a really big difference. But it happens all the time that, I just see people that, they just missed getting hit by a boulder or a car, or everybody's had close calls, everybody's had a sickness, everybody's had an illness, everybody's had something that almost happened to them that's supposed to be like a wake-up call, and it doesn't, and you just go on with life as if it's going to happen again next time. And that Jesus is gracious in terms of that he heals everybody no matter what, and he's gracious that he doesn't just say, man, I healed you of leprosy and you didn't even come back to thank me. You just went about your merry way.
Yeah.
So, and then so it can be a story to just it's super quick, but it is vital, I think. And we may return to that. We'll see how it goes. So then in, the rest of this chapter could probably be described as the cost of discipleship. And then so often Jesus and God are promised to people in some genie in the sky. It's going to make life great and good and beautiful. And that, following Jesus is going to be a bed of roses, on a hill of poppies by a rainbow, where you're going to win the lottery and have a wonderful, beautiful husband or wife and a great spouse and a good, successful career and a great business. And that's what Jesus can do for you. And that is not what Jesus promises. He does promise some amazing things in the future, but he doesn't promise them right now. And so that, hold on, I got to turn off my stupid phone. So.
Well, but I think you also do get, sometimes you get the joy and the happiness. If you know, I mean, to give thanks for people that are going to be by your side no matter what. I mean, I think that there is that joy in that, but it certainly doesn't look like I would have, mapped it out when I was 18 of how my happy life was going to be. I mean, it's looks nothing like that.
Yeah. And so I think that so much of what Jesus does is he's giving future promises, and that he's also often giving warnings about what it's going to take for people to follow him in this life. And we don't like that. That's not a good sell. Like if we really just took, Jesus has a lot of warnings in terms of telling people there's a cost to being a disciple of Jesus. Now there's great rewards, some of them in this life and most of them in the next. It's well worth it, but there is a cost. And the rest of this chapter can be more of Jesus telling you, well, hey, the Sermon on the Mount, I've been describing what it means to be a disciple, to be a follower of Jesus, to be a peacemaker like I want you to do. I'm going to tell you what it's going to take, and now I'm going to tell you what it's going to cost you. And he's outlaying different types of costs, because it may cost one person everything, but it may cost one person in certain areas more than it does in other. Maybe it costs you financially, maybe it costs you relationally, maybe it costs your career, maybe, or maybe all of those things. And in some rare occasions, none of them, but definitely don't expect that. And I think that what we do is we kind of say, well, God loving you so much that he sent Jesus to die for you, to forgive you your sins, to communicate to you who he is, that the creator of the universe loves you and wants to have a relationship with you and doesn't hold any of the things you've done against you. And you're standing with him is that you're forgiven. And in fact, he's so dedicated and loyal and committing to you that instead of you seeking him, you find out he has sought you, and he wants so incredibly to demonstrate that to you that he's willing to sacrifice his own son, to die to himself, that you might be able to be in relationship, that he can save your relationship. So your relationship is saved or you're saved. And what we do so often is we say, that's not enough. We need more. Yeah. And let's give you goodies, a career or a romance or something like that.
I think we all have, and I've certainly felt the temptation of having just untouchable in my life. I want to say, okay, Lord, I'm going to give you my life. It's you are going to be the Lord of my life. I'm going to follow you. I'm ready. Let's go. Oh, well, no, don't touch my schooling. No, that's not, you can't mess with that part. So that's just going to be over here on this little thing, and you can have everything else.
So there's that's what now we're putting. Jesus is now laid out in the greatest sermon ever spoken, and now he's beginning to lay out the cost. He's describing the character, and now he's describing the cost. And so as he continues here, so verse 18, now when Jesus saw great crowds around him, he gave orders to go over to the other side. And a scribe came up to him and says, teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus says to him, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And another disciple said to him, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. But Jesus said to him, follow me and leave the dead to bury their own dead. So these can seem like very strange accounts, but I'll give you my read on this. The first part, and then Jesus might need some peace and quiet. It's interesting. He sees the crowds and he gave orders to go to the other side. So he's just trying to get some quiet time. But once again, he's always being willing to be inconvenienced. And he's inviting and opening up inconvenience. His quiet time, his prayer time, his me time. I would love to write I don't know, maybe I'll open a Twitter. I've been thinking about opening a Twitter to do hashtag things Jesus never said, which is like something like, you can't love other people until you love yourself. Jesus never said anything like that. You can't take care of other people until you really take care of yourself, something like that. And so I don't know, there's a million things that come to mind, but maybe I could just start a whole hashtagging about things, hashtag things Jesus never said, hashtag not in the Bible, something like that. There's all kinds of things. Early to bed, early to rise makes you healthy, wealthy, and wise. I don't know. There's a lot of different sayings like that. Like, take time for me. Well, those aren't biblical ethics, right? You take time for other people. You love other people first. We're all professionals at loving ourselves. There's no doubt about that. We know how to love ourselves really well. So always the reminder is to love other people and put them first, because our default setting is always us first. So there's just another example of Jesus maybe wanting to just take some time to escape, but always being, the crowds are still coming. He can't get away. So the other thing is for all of us, like, jump in there if you have questions, if you have comments. Please don't hesitate to jump in or raise your hand or whatever. And then Sarah's free to do that as well. So, but the first thing is the scribe came and says, teacher. He says rabbi. He's using a very respectful term for Jesus here, and he says, I will follow you wherever you go. So now we don't know what happened to the scribe. We don't know the end of the story, but a couple things occur to me. One of them is that the scribe could think like, okay, I'm taking a look at Jesus' followers. You got some rough and tumble guys, some fishermen, and you have some zealots, and you have a tax collector, and you don't have a very educated bunch. Like, maybe you need a guy like me. There's it could be. I mean, we have to remember, use our imaginations, and
or
use
seeing
questions.
like all of the crowds following Jesus, he's looking to get a little bit of glory, because one of the things that it says in other parts of scripture is that Jesus knew what was in people's hearts. Like it would say the Pharisees were thinking to themselves, and Jesus heard what they're saying, or something like that, and then he responds. So he's not always responding to the face value of what we're doing, but he's responding to the heart that we're having when we're doing it. And so based off of his response of no, this is not like a glory thing. You're not going to get glory following me. And so that maybe that's what he was looking at.
Yeah, it's interesting. As much conjecture as there is, we have no reason to believe that this guy wasn't asking for real. Like, we do have instances where Jesus responds harshly with people, and he calls them, why, that's the other thing, hashtag not in the Bible, or sweet Jesus, meek and mild, that this is a book about how to be nice to one another. Jesus called people whitewashed tombs. He called them brood of vipers. He called them twice as much children of hell. Paul in the letter to the Galatians is so angry at them for turning back and losing faith that he says, I wish that you would castrate yourselves. And Paul talks about something being a heap of shit, crap. That the Bible is much more a graphic novel than it is a children's story.
That's true.
And so you can tell when Jesus is really mad at somebody. It's evident. I mean, he goes in and he makes a whip, and he turns over the tables and yells at people because they've ruined the temple that's supposed to be a house of God. So you know where you stand with Jesus. Whoever you were, he had grace for people, but he let people know what they needed to know in terms of, so there's no reason to think that this scribe wasn't sincere in what he wanted to say. First of all, it's miraculous, because if you understand the response that the religious authorities and the religious educated elite, which this scribe was, had towards Jesus, well, they were the guys that were cunning enough to get him killed.
Yeah.
It was the scribes and the Pharisees. There were also scribes and Pharisees that Jesus lambasted with these horrible insults.
Yeah.
Okay. So this guy wasn't one of them.
Yeah.
Somehow, but what Jesus is saying to him is this: foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man, that's what Jesus refers to himself. That's Jesus' preferred self-description, nickname for himself, which is we could go back and do this, but basically any Jew who knew anything about anything knew that meant God, that meant the Son, God, like the Son of Man was synonymous with God. That's why they thought it was blasphemous, because Jesus calls himself Son of Man, which means calling yourself God, which is, but it's also interesting that we don't get that this scribe is offended at that term, but what Jesus is doing is warning him. The Son of Man, me, has nowhere to lay his head. the birds of the nest has typically been used to talk about the Gentiles, and foxes have holes, maybe a reference to somebody cunning like himself or something. You know, there were other scribes and Pharisees that came to him in the dark of night, like Nicodemus, when nobody was watching, you know. And so, but it appears that what Jesus is letting this guy know is that there's a cost to following me, that you are going to be rejected.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like I sort of, for a scribe, and which it happened. There later became, some of Caesar's household became Christians, you know, Roman soldiers became Christians. And I don't even know how radical, I'm just trying to think about how radical this is. This is probably like, you know, a member of Antifa that becomes like a Trump follower and works as Trump's press secretary. Like, nope. Okay, that Antifa guy will have nowhere, well, he won't go and be hunted for what he's done. Like, he has betrayed the cause. He has sold out to the man. He has come and done something that is against everything that he and his people stand for, all they've been working for. And they're, you know, a radical bunch of people. Okay, I mean, that's just an analogy that springs to mind and how radical this is. So if this scribe really meant this, it is like an unheard of. What?
Turn the heater up.
Okay, my wife's turning up the heater because it's cold apparently. So the lights flicker when that happens. I tutor in here. I do private tutoring, and so when it's cold and I tutor, my student always wants to know why the light is flashing, because it's the heater going on. Okay, so what appears to be happening there is that he's giving this warning, and it really can be the case that Jesus wants people to know the cost ahead of time. He doesn't ever want to surprise them. There's no fine print, right? There's no trying to trick them in like it's going to be better than it is.
Yeah.
There's no lulling them in. There's no sell. There's no easing them in. There's no smoothing the way.
Bait and switch. Hashtag something Jesus never did.
Yeah, there's no bait and switch, right? And that and kind of what is interesting about this is that we don't know the end of the story, but if this happens, this will be miraculous. And there were some miraculous conversions. I mean, this wasn't unheard of. There were people that made great and drastic changes, and have today made great and amazing and phenomenal changes. There's a guy that's there's a book called Son of Hamas, and he is the son of the founder of Hamas, which is a terrorist organization in the Middle East, and one of their stated goals is death to Israel and to all Jews and to Christians. And he was actually in prison, and his father was the founder of this Hamas organization, and he actually ended up becoming a Christian, which is one of the enemies of his world. And he said, because he had a dream, and his dream told him, it said, go to this place by this fountain, and there's going to be somebody that's going to offer to read you a book. And he went, and he went there, and there was a Christian there that was somebody who was an evangelist and wanted to share with him, and read him the Bible and read for him, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And he'd never heard that before. He grew up in a world of, like vengeance the way gangs do, which is you blow up your enemies, you get vengeance upon, you kill them, And so this guy has become a Christian. He now is down in San Diego at a church in San Diego, last I heard. But the thing that he knows is, he says, well, probably at some point, the terrorist organization that my father's a part of, they may come and get me. Like they're not gonna want me. I can't become a Christian. They're not gonna want me to expose who they are, and that they're about hatred and violence, and that Jesus is the only God that says love your enemy and pray for those who persecute. Turn the other cheek. Don't overcome evil, but with evil, but overcome evil with good. He said, but I knew that going in. I read the scripture. Nobody promised him peace and prosperity and protection. He went in with eyes wide open, and his interviews, he is very in terms of tranquil and peaceful, but it's not because he's promised security in this lifetime. It's because he knows the cost for him of following Jesus, and nobody sugarcoated it. like, and he's okay with that, right? It's not like he became a Christian and then he read all this stuff and he said, you know, you might make enemies of your family. You know, there's going to be a cost. There's going to be a cultural cost, an economic cost, a social cost, a friendship cost, a financial cost. And sometimes it seems like, wow, you know, we have this weird sense that I think the most incredible thing you can do in life is to know who God is and what your relationship to is to him, and to know who Jesus is. But sometimes it's hard to sell, and we're always tempted to, like I said, to dress it up, to sweeten the pot, as if what was done is not enough.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that example of Jesus because he got people to follow him eyes wide open.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like we're trying to do like an infomercial, but wait, there's more.
Yeah. So, and I believe, so I understand. I don't condemn this message from Christians, and I get that because there's this, the motivation is good, you know, like, you know, that deep down people want to know people to know who God and Jesus is, and they're thinking, if I could just get them there and get them in and almost like lure them in, that it would be worth it in the end, you know, that the ends will justify the means. But I think it ends up being, well, you could end up feeling deceived. You know, I had a friend, Torrance knows him, his name is Simi. And I remember him sharing this. I think he was teaching at a men's conference. And he says, I almost was blown out of the kingdom of Jesus because I felt I was lied to and deceived. People said that once you become a follower of Jesus, life is going to be great. And he says, and life crumbled for me. You know, the relationships fell apart and I lost my job and I lost my house. He says, life crumbled. And I felt like, wait a second, like I had been lied to, I've been deceived, I've been tricked. And he said, it's only because I, you know, by the grace of God that I maintained my faith and wasn't just gone, but I felt like just leaving. And I was so angry at people because they promised me things that weren't true. And they had the best of intentions. But that's why I think so many people end up getting angry at God.
Yeah.
And they end up being disillusioned and frustrated because as soon as stuff happens, then you're like, wait a minute, this isn't supposed to happen to me.
Yeah.
Like, this is not a part of the bargain. This is not what I signed up for. I didn't know there was a cost. I didn't know that, you know, that things could still go bad for me or something like that.
But we should, I mean, because if you think about it, it's you are stepping into the kingdom of God, and Satan, who doesn't play by any rules, is pissed off about that. You know, I mean, that's one of the things that we tell people when they get baptized. We say, okay, now Satan's going to come at you hard.
Yeah, well, right, as if that there's not going to be, well, the chiming clock says it's 8 o'clock. That's my dad's old mantle clock that chimes, and so that also interrupts us. But that there's not going to be temptation, that it's going to somehow be smooth sailing.
Yeah, exactly. So why wouldn't people, I mean, think about that? I mean, obviously it's not like Satan's going to be like, oh, all right, well, I guess you picked that team, so we're done now.
And please don't hear me say that life following Jesus is horrible and miserable and full of persecution and frustration, dilemma, and cost. That's a part of it, and you ought not to think that that's not going to happen. There is incredible and deep and rich and rewarding things, and it is far worth it, even just in this lifetime. Now, the great promises of what's going to happen in the future, okay, that pales in comparison. But even right now, those things, the cost, it's like cost-benefit analysis or return on investment is well worth it. Deep and rich and amazing to know purpose, to know meaning, to know morality, to know destiny, to have people that are loving, dogged, loyal, committed people to you, and to understand what your relationship to God is. But it is good to know what the cost is. My dad always said, despair and discouragement are the bastard children of false expectations. And I think that's a lot of times where you see Christians that fail in the faith is because they have some false expectations because of some misguided but well-meaning teaching. And then if their world crashes down, they can't handle it. And then they're discouraged, disillusioned, mad at God, and they're just out of here, you know. So we're going to let that chime give us a 2-minute, since it's 8 o'clock. We'll take 2 minutes. We'll come back. And so you can stand up, stretch, grab some water, whatever that may be, and then we'll finish up. I think we'll be able to actually finish up the last part of the chapter. Ha 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 ha.
No, we've done
No, I think
we've done like 3 verses.
I know, but some of it we're not going to do all of it. My wife is laughing at me during Bible study. I want
And we're
everybody to
certainly
know.
not going to get through 9
No.
next week.
Yeah, ha, ha. Okay. I'm gonna get some water.
You trying to go through there?
Wrong stuff. We got about 1 minute left. We should like have a countdown timer or something. Uh-oh, where's my water? 1 minute. All right. We'll get started here in just a second. Sarah is returning. All right. So my lovely wife is back, and we'll get rolling for the second half. We'll see how we do. So, okay. So remember, as we started the second half of this chapter, we learned why Peter was mad. Then we learned that there's a purpose for what God is doing in our lives, that when we're saved and rescued, that there's a purpose for that, right? That is the appropriate thing to do if you're a leper and you get healed by Jesus, is to give thanks to him, to return and then to serve him like Peter's mother did, but not everybody does that. And that's part of the grace of God, is that, he doesn't just smite those lepers that don't return to him. And then in that first section with the scribes, Jesus is laying out that there's going to be a social cultural cost. If you're a scribe and you don't condemn and hate Jesus, there's a cost. There's not, no one's going to tolerate that. No one's going to take you back in. You're going to lose your job. You're going to lose your friends, so there's a social cultural cost. And then in the next section, Jesus is laying out, there's like a familial or family and financial cost. So here's another one. Another one of his disciples said to him, "Lord, let me first go and bury my father." Seems like a reasonable thing. Jesus said to him, "Follow me and leave the dead to bury their own dead." I mean, wow, Jesus is kind of harsh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sweet Jesus, meek and mild, always saying things to make us peaceful and tranquil and at ease. Okay. Well, first of all, got to know what's going on here is super important. And that this does not mean like
The funeral's tomorrow.
the funeral's tomorrow, and that, I gotta go, I just gotta go, dump some dirt on the casket. So this means a couple things. This means taking care of your dad until he dies. So that's one particular issue. But probably the bigger issue here is, I want my inheritance. I cannot get my inheritance until my father dies. So, hey, it's kind of like, I'm going to follow you after my dad dies and I get my inheritance. So that I'm going to take care of him and do what needs to be done and that sort of thing, and then I'm going to get my money, and then I'll come and get you. You know, it's kind of, let me first do this. So it's interesting, right? He says, let me first go and bury my father. Well, so Jesus understood this had a more greater significance than, right, just attending a funeral. And so then Jesus has outlined two more costs here. There's a financial cost and there's a family cost, or certainly there's likely to be, because this guy is asking first, and then Jesus is responding, especially if we go back, he's been outlining, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all these things will be added unto you. So the first thing that Jesus wants people to do, ahead of finances, ahead of family, ahead of career, ahead of the sociology ladder, the cultural ladder, is me first. Well, when Jesus wants to be first, that means everything else is second or third or fourth. That's not always popular with people. In fact, it's very often not popular. It's not popular with a spouse or a loved one. It's not popular with your family. It's not popular with your job. It's not popular with your, with the cultural crowd. It doesn't make you a good host at parties, And so it's, you can look at this and we go, well, right here, Jesus has healed some people. We don't know who they are. I mean, first of all, these two people could have been people Jesus healed. You got to use your imagination and realize, well, right before this, he heals a lady. And what does she do? Immediately, she gets up and serves him. He heals a bunch more people. And now we hear some accounts. These could be people that were healed. We don't know. But right here in verses 18, 19, in 4 verses, Jesus is laying out in full graphic detail the cost of following him. And it sort of runs the spectrum. There's not really anything that's not covered in this. And he's saying that to follow me is going to have a cost. It's going to have an impact. It'll be worth it. But seeking first the kingdom of heaven means putting some other things on the back burner. And for one of the guys, it was his status as a teacher of the law, as an educated person, as an accepted person intellectually. And then, so that's going to mean something. There's nowhere to rest and relax. And then for this other guy, it's going to cost him in terms of his family relationship, because these other guys, they just up and left. They left. If you remember, it's very interesting that at the beginning, when Jesus is calling disciples, and some of the people that are already there, the brothers left their father and their nets and went and followed him. So they didn't say, let me first go do something. They said, let me first follow Jesus. But
well, Peter has a mother-in-law, which means he has a wife.
Right. And exactly. So these guys had families, they had a job, they had occupations, but Jesus was saying, first things first. Now, these other things will be added to you. And they still had relationships with these people, but there's priorities in life and there's a cost, and Jesus wants people to know that. And I think that, and we don't know the end of either of these stories, and we don't know how they came to be in front of Jesus. Please don't hear me saying, oh, these guys were healed by Jesus and then they just rejected him. All I mean is that it could be the case, and that you have to allow for that possibility, and you want to use your imagination and just say, well, if I got healed by Jesus and I had a sickness or disease, I would want to say, hey, I'm going to come follow you. And he says, all right, let's go right now. And I'd be like, well, wait, right now? Like, I get my pension and I got to work for 3 more years and I get my pension, or whatever that may be. I got to go check with my wife. My dad is not, there's like, all of a sudden we realize Jesus means now.
Yeah. Ooh, this is not a good time for me.
Yeah, it's not good. I know you just healed me, and I know I had leprosy, and I know that, but I'll get to it when it's convenient, when I've accomplished a few things, when I've done this, when I've got this under my belt, when it's convenient, when it won't cost me as much. And then Jesus is using, that's why I think Jesus is using heart lines, let the dead bury the dead. He wants us to know, sorry, the call for me is now. And it does mean drop your nets and call. It does mean seek first the kingdom. It doesn't mean first let me go do anything else. So Jesus heals people unconditionally and forgives them no matter what they've done. They're standing with people that you're forgiven. But the call that he gives to people has conditions and costs to it, meaning it's not just like anything goes or when you get a chance or when it's convenient. And well, it's not everybody likes that. And that's probably one of the reasons why we don't preach this everywhere, and that it's not necessarily something that always we want to be upfront about. And it's in the fine print somewhere.
Yeah, I think some pastors go from verse 17 to verse 23.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, Sarah, why don't you read verse 23, that story?
Okay.
So, okay. First of all, the first one took a long time. The second one took a little bit of time, and we'll see if we can get through chapter 8, and then my wife won't laugh at me anymore.
Oh, I'm going to, because we're not going to. And when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves. But he was asleep. And they went and woke him, saying, "Save us, Lord, we're perishing." And he said to them, "Why are you afraid, O men of little faith?" Then he rose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. And the men marveled, saying, "What sort of man is this, that even the winds and sea obey him?" I'm assuming that, just that.
Yeah. So that section there, I don't think that I want to spend a whole deal of time on this, because this is more like knowing things. Like, this is sometimes we can learn so much and learn the history and learn the Greek and learn the context. And that can be really helpful, and it is important, but it's not what we're getting at in terms of the personal nature of this. What do I still lack? How does this help me understand who Jesus is and what he wants from me? You know?
But I do have to say, just as far as the disciples and their mindset, I think that we do, I mean, so to apply it to us, I think that we do this. You know, we say, we have a situation, we say, "Lord, save me from this situation. This is too tough." And then he does, and we're like, whoa, what? I didn't expect that. I didn't actually expect him to be able to work in there. But it's like, why not? Why don't I expect him to? Why don't I do these disciples? They left their families. We just talked about them leaving their families and following, paying the cost to follow him. And they don't know who this guy is. Like, they don't know that even the waves and the winds are going to obey him. They don't know that all of creation is subject to him. They don't get that. So I pray, Lord, save me. But it's like, I don't really believe it. And then when he does, I'm surprised. I'm surprised that I can believe it.
Yeah, and we have far less excuse than they did, because they couldn't even conceive of such things. Like a man being blind and now he can see. Like, they had no concept of that.
Exactly.
Very few people ever in history had they even heard of something like that.
At this time, they hadn't seen the crucifixion. Yeah, we have that, and we still don't believe.
Well, I think one of the things that is really helpful and encouraging just about this particular section is that Jesus was very harsh and very forthcoming and very blunt. He was mad blunt, as one of my students used to say, in counting the cost. He's also mad blunt in talking about the rewards. But the hopeful thing is that you can give it to people straight and they keep coming. He was able to communicate two things. There's a high cost, there's an even higher reward. And that he loved people so much, they were still willing to follow him, through fire, through risk, and knowing full well what the cost would be. And I think that's really hopeful, because it can let us know, no, we can give it to him straight. And what we ought to do is, number one, it's worth it. The reward is worth it. What you get is totally worth it. It is going to cost you. Be mad blunt, but then somehow communicate to people. But this Jesus is worth getting to know. Mm-hmm. And it's all going to be worth it. And he loves you that much. And so that's what we need to show people, is that they ought to experience something about God that's like, man, the juice is worth the squeeze. Like, keep going, risk, get out on the ocean, even though it's stormy. Like, Jesus somehow communicated mad bluntly what was really going on and who he was and what it would take and the character of the person, but still communicated such a great love and a care and compassion and pity and desire and loyalty and faithfulness that people came anyway. And that's the great challenge of us as representatives of Jesus, to hold those dual things. Like, don't fudge on one side, don't make it all rainbows and butterflies, but yet still have the love and the care, and the compassion of the people. Like, man, that is a great God, and he's worth following, despite maybe the risks,
Yeah.
that come with that.
Well, I think that just shows how much he cares about us. I mean, I'm not gonna be mad blunt and risk, like flack or something for somebody that I don't care about. But I'm gonna tell it to it straight. If Jack is walking into the street and and a big truck is coming, I'm not gonna be like, oh Jack, come and look at this flower instead. Doesn't that sound like, no, I'm gonna be like, hey, well, you're about to get hit by a truck.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna be blunt, I'm gonna be to the point because I care about your life. I want to save you.
Yeah, and Jesus, he's upping the ante. That it could be you might argue at the beginning that when he called the disciples, they didn't know what they were in for. They thought, oh, I can go and bury my father. I can still be a scribe. I could, and it's kind of like you might get to this point and say, we got to bail out. When Jesus gets in that boat and the storms happen, and he's talked about being a peacemaker, he's talked about being persecuted. He said, oh, this might cost you your inheritance. This might cost you your family. This might cost you your friends, your social status, that people are going to reject you. It's kind of like Jesus gets in that boat and shoves off, and you just like, bye. You give him a push and let him go.
Mm.
But that's the encouraging part, is they did experience something with him. They encountered something about him that still said, get in the boat with him. Come with me. They, it's interesting. They followed him, because remember, he says, Jesus said, so interesting, verse 22, Jesus said to him, follow me and leave the dead to bury the dead. Okay, and then verse 23, and when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. They're hearing this message too. They didn't know everything at the very beginning. They couldn't possibly, they didn't have some magic knowledge. They understood something about who Jesus was. And they said, this guy is worth taking a chance on. But they were getting a mouthful and an earful and an eyeful. And there's no doubt about them that they didn't have ESP. They were learning along the way. And of course, a lot of people didn't stick around, but they stuck around. Even after kind of like it's all, it wasn't all on the table the first time Jesus saw them, but it's all on the table now. He's laid it out. He's preached the sermon. He's talked about the cost. He's now gone over in these previous little encounters. All the way it's going to cost you. They now had eyes wide open. Everything's laid out on the table. And they still. So that's also how we need to communicate who God is, that he's worth all of this. And that Jesus was somehow in all this. They said, this guy's still worth following. It's worth the risk. It's worth it. I count the cost, and it's as we'll get to later, it's the pearl of great price. It's this thing that you're like, I'll be willing to give everything for that, because that is really everything.
Yeah.
And that really is hopeful, because you think about that. It's almost like it's not necessarily as hopeful when they first follow him. It's good they had some idea, but it's really hopeful that they continue after these encounters. It's beautiful and wonderful and a little scary, and helps us realize that it's ultimately going to be something that is worth doing in the end, and that we don't have to sort of bury our head in the sand. We don't have to have any blind faith. We don't have to believe Jesus is going to be some genie that we can go forward, and that's to me amazing. And then the last section here is that it's kind of a comical thing, but basically, so hey, they go over, there's two demoniacs, so people that so there's differentiation here. Like, there's people that are sick, and there's people that are really possessed by demons. So there's a clear delineation, at least in the writer's eyes, between these two things, And so they cried out, what have you done with us, O Son of God? Okay, so they knew who he was. Have you come here to torment us before the time? Before the time, just really, once again, it's not super important, but that Jesus is not really supposed to, or as they understood it, and demons and their limited knowledge, defeat them and defeat Satan until the end, until it's all sort of finished. So they're kind of like, hey, we're not at this final battle. We're not at the end of times. Like, this is sort of in the middle or early on, what are you doing? I think they know who he is, and they kind of are wondering what's going on. Like, are you gonna leave us alone, or So it's just kind of an interesting encounter, And then and so there's some pigs. So first of all, this is Gentile territory. Pigs were unclean to Jews, so they were in the Gentile region of things. So in the non-Jewish people like this, and that and if you cast us out, send us into the herd of swine. For whatever reason, they didn't want to be totally done with, and so then they're just asking for a favor or something. It's kind of strange. And he said to them, "Go." It's like there's no special incantation. There's no nothing. I mean, he just walks by, and then they go into the pigs. These evil spirits go to the herd of pigs, and the herdsman fled. They go down all these pigs go down the water, they die, and okay. And they went to the city and told everything what had happened to the demoniacs. And behold, all the city came out to meet him, and they were so happy. They were like overjoyed, and they said, "Man, these two guys that these guys have been haunting us and breaking into buildings and doing crazy stuff, and we're so happy that you healed our friends." No,
It's so crazy.
no. They said, "Get the heck out of here." Well, because they were herdsmen and pigs were their livelihood, and they were pretty pissed off at Jesus that he would kill all their pigs, and it cost them some money. So it's kind of interesting. Right after Jesus lays out financial cost, he outlays a situation where there is financial cost and people are pissed at him. Like, it definitely shows that, and also in the Sermon on the Mount, the high value that Jesus places upon human beings, and that the consideration is for people over animals, and the consideration is for people over economic gain. And that's an ethic that can be lost in our culture, is that so often we can be so concerned with something like PETA or animal rights that we're not concerned with human rights, and that we're well, so both of us, so we get that, right? But that might be somewhat culturally acceptable, or we just maybe look the other way, or so be it, and there's a lot of unfortunate ramifications of that. There's a huge changeover in the United States in the late 70s and early 80s, because the animal rights activists were so rabidly against testing on animals for human vaccinations that they made the pharmaceutical companies change over and use aborted fetal tissue for vaccinations and research. So what happened is you had a flipping that you can't use monkeys and chickens and hamsters and guinea pigs to develop scientific research for vaccinations to protect people from diseases like polio or whatever that is, but you can use baby parts. And so the pharmaceutical companies ended up getting in bed with the abortion clinics and the abortion industry and finding a way to fund them and using aborted fetal tissue and baby parts to do medical research, because people didn't know or care as much about the babies as they did about the animals. And so it's this inverted sense. Now, all people should want animals to be treated ethically, but when you elevate animals over human beings, you're really contradicting how Jesus sees the order of things. Now, he doesn't want you to be cruel to animals, and there's a way that we treat them, but they are part of the design of nature. That is something that helps and enhances human beings. They've been placed in our care.
It's our responsibility to care for them.
But we have to be careful how we do that. And then, of course, economic concerns. We all know that people will lie, cheat, steal, rob, poison anybody to get ahead economically. And Jesus is reminding us of some ethics that he has, is that people first over economic concerns, and people first over even animals. That's how God is valuing, sort of his order of creation. And sometimes that's something that we maybe need to be reminded of, certainly, and maybe less so in terms of the animals and humans. That's not as frequent, but in terms of economic interest over human interest, that would be great if everybody came out to meet him and said, "Thank you for healing our friends," but they weren't. They were pissed off, and you're thinking, wow, like, geez, I mean, if you were those guys, that they were probably somebody's brother and sons, you know, and you're like, golly, we just got healed and nobody's celebrating having a party. You're pissed off because the pigs are dead, you know, and it's just a deflating, to me, it's a deflating story, but so true of human beings, right? It's so just true of how we are that the story has to be in there to, you know, to remind us and let us know, and that it's there's, you know, it's the story of COSK right afterwards, and I think that that's an interesting part of this whole story. And it's not, you know, we always have to be reminded that what is here is here for purpose. The writer didn't put things in here willy-nilly. That it's what's written, what's not written, the stories that are there, the stories that why they're there, the order they're in, everything is to make a point and to let us, this is all material that's edited by these writers to help us understand who Jesus is and that we might believe in him. That's like the stated purpose of the writers of the scripture. And it says as much in the Gospel of John, the letters, and so that we're trusting what this story is, and that it's communicated for a purpose. It's not just like a recording that captures everything that happens, but it's there because it helps us understand the essence, the person, the character, the place of Jesus, and then of course our relationship to him as well, you know. So and remind us of things that we need to be reminded about, and it always captures human nature beautifully. That's one thing that you can tell about Jesus, that sometimes there's a truth is truth no matter the source, and there's a lot of religion and religious ideas out there that even make sense and, you know, are legitimate. However, Jesus always talked about real things. He captured the real nature of human beings, and there's always for me a point in which I can go so far in a certain religious or philosophical expression that I get off the train. You know, and I get off the Buddhist train when they say, you know, suffering is an illusion. I say, man, oh man, I've known people that were tortured, and I know the anguish of how about being dumped, you know, how about having your heart broken or somebody betray you. Pain is not an illusion. Now there are some things that are within that religious system that they do get right, but that is something where I get off the train, and I just never, once I get on the Jesus train, I just keep going. There's no way that he doesn't describe my heart's desires and the nature of human beings and our own proclivity for sin and our selfishness. And he always talks about the real things in life. And so I just carry on until I find a place I would have to get off, and I never got off. You know, there was an astronomer named Hugh Ross, and he was at 17. He was the most famous and noteworthy and probably the smartest astronomer with a doctorate degree in all of Canada. And he said, well, he wasn't a Christian as a youth, but there was a Bible in his room, and somebody said, well, you've got to study religions. So he said, I'm going to pick up all the holy books of all the different major religions, and I'm going to read till I find a scientific error. Now, remember, at 17, he's in charge of the Royal Astronomers Society, okay? And so he picks up every holy book, and he reads till he finds an error. And he reads the Quran, and he finds an error. He says, the Quran says a woman's period of having a baby is 6 months. And he says, well, it's 9 months, obviously. He says, this can't be an inspired word of God, and he puts that away.
I can verify that.
Yeah, he's like, okay, you know, so he's looking for historical, scientific errors in books, okay? And then he reads, you know, he reads another one. I can't go through all of them, but that's just one example. And then he says, he reads the Bible. He says, I picked up the Bible, and I started with Genesis, and he says, I was looking for what was wrong. He says, I read it from Genesis to the very end of Revelation. He says, there's no scientific error in the whole thing. Genesis describes the creation of the world as it actually happened from a cosmological astronomer's point of view. And he says, nothing is in error. He says, this book was written, well, Genesis was written more than 2,000 years ago. They could not have known this scientific information about how the earth was created unless it was revealed by a higher power. They did not have the knowledge. They didn't have the telescopes. They didn't have the science. We are only now in the 21st century discovering the things that verify how Genesis describes creation. He says, this book could only have been and must have been inspired by God. So he never got off the train. And he read every religion. He read the Quran, and he read the Buddhist literature, and he read the Hindu literature, and he read Christian literature. And the Christian one's only one that he started and finished and never found anything wrong. And so he said, I came to believe that this was true. Well, for me too, I have to respect what I believe. And when it comes to Christianity, I haven't found anything that I had to like shut off my brain or my heart or anything like that. And so that's for me why I'm still getting in the boat and thinking that, you know, the juice is worth the squeeze and the cost is there. But the amazing things that are reaped and the benefits and what's there is well worth it. And it's just true. I always have to give myself, you know, to what is true. So,
All right.
there we
I
go.
will say, in front of a Zoom full of witnesses, you were right. We finished the whole chapter.
Bam. All right, so we're going to read chapter 9 for next week. And we will not get through that, but we'll give ourselves an attempt.
We got
hope
very
to
controversial tonight.
hope to
Talked
see.
about abortion and animal
I know.
rights and putting the Lord before your family and career and everything.
Yeah.
It's very controversial. And
and-
everybody is still on.
I know.
So that's pretty good.
All right, well, anybody have any comments or questions, anything you want to say before we get out of here? As always, please feel free to chase us down if you want to talk more, if you have anything else you want to pursue or whatever may be, or some questions about what we talked about tonight. So anybody got anything they want to say?
Even if there's challenge. I mean,
Yeah.
we are not afraid of
Correct.
challenge and,
No
and
question.
sharpening.
No question is a bad question. No question is off limits. No question will offend me. All right. Well, it's great to see everybody. Some of you will see on Sunday. So Mia, it's good to see you. We hope to see you guys Sunday. John Bang, great to see you for a little bit. And
Oh,
Miriam, it was awesome to hear you tonight. And we miss Sandra, but maybe we'll see you next.
Sandra has COVID.
Oh, no.
Is she-
Yeah, that's why she couldn't make it.
All right. Well, if you need anything or if she needs anything, let us know. We can deliver or whatever. But we'll be praying for her, and
Thank you.
we will maybe just trying to spend time with her. Okay. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank
Good
you.
night.
See you later.
Good night, guys.
Thank you. Good night.
Back.
Good night.